In this week's Torah portion, Parshat Chukat, the people come to Moses and Aaron with a complaint. They are thirsty. There is not enough water to drink. Why has God brought us out of the wilderness for us and our beasts to die here, they ask. Why did you make us leave Egypt to bring us to this wretched place, a place with no grain or figs or vines or pomegranates? There's not even water to drink. God hears the Israelites' complaint and tells Moses to take his staff and go to a large rock, which God will designate. God instructs Moses to ask the rock for water, and water will pour forth. And through this miracle, God will be reaffirmed as the caretaker of Israel. But Moses, who has some serious anger issues, insults the Israelites and strikes the rock with his staff instead of speaking to it. God is disappointed with this outburst and decrees that Moses will not be allowed to enter the promised land. As I read this story this year, I was distracted by one small detail I'd never noticed before. What's going on with the pomegranates? The complaint and God's response is all about a lack of water. But when the Israelites get to the climax of their speech, they make this strange detour. Why have you brought us to this wretched place, a place with no grains or figs or vines or pomegranates? These are people wandering in the wilderness, and yet they are complaining about a lack of crops like grapevines and pomegranate trees. Shouldn't their focus be on the more immediate need of drinking water? While there is abundant material in the commentaries about this story, almost none of it addresses this strange and seemingly random verse. I suspect that most of the commentators ignore it because the story makes complete sense without it. The verse seems like a non sequitur, almost like it's out of place. And there's some modern scholarship to suggest that perhaps it is out of place. Rabbi Dr. David Frankel posits that this verse was actually cut out of a story from earlier in the book of Numbers, the tale of the 12 spies. In that story, the Israelites are about to cross over into the promised land, and God commands them to send scouts to reconnoiter the land. Moses instructs them, go and seek what kind of country it is. Are the people who dwell there strong or weak, few or many? Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? Is the soil rich or poor? Is it wooded or not? And take pains to bring back some of the fruit of the land. Rabbi Frankel suggests that there was an earlier version of this story that is mostly lost to history, and that this story took place after the Israelites had crossed into the promised land. They'd entered through the south into the desert, the Negev. Finding a largely dry and desolate landscape, the Israelites are despondent. Rabbi Frankel says that this is the original context for the verse. You told us you were bringing us to a green and abundant land, a land flowing with milk and honey. But all we see here is dirt and rocks. Where are the grains and the figs and the grapes and the pomegranates which we were promised? It makes more sense here, and the story of the 12 spies then becomes God's response to their complaint. God sends the spies not into the promised land, but rather further north to prove to the Israelites that they just have to make it through the desert and they will come to the verdant land which God has promised. Using various documentary techniques, Rabbi Frankel says that at some later point, the editors of the Torah reimagined this story to take place on the other side of the Jordan River, outside of the Promised Land. But this meant that the complaint of the Israelites no longer made any sense. Rather than cutting this text completely, it is, after all, the sacred text of the Torah, the editors moved this verse and combined it with another story about the Israelites complaining, the story of the water and the rock from this week's Parsha. Thus, the verse seems out of place because perhaps it was originally written in a different context. I find Rabbi Dr. Frankel's arguments fascinating. I'm intrigued by what it suggests about the motivation of the Torah's ancient editor, a person or group whose identity has been lost to history. And I find his argument compelling. He brings a lot of convincing evidence that is, frankly, too technical for this setting. If you're looking for an excuse to stay for a lot longer in the air conditioning, you can ask me about it at Oneg. But I am also convinced by Rabbi Frankel's argument because I just got back from the Negev. And I can certainly see what the Israelites might have been complaining about. I had the pleasure of accompanying our 22 teens and the amazing Helfman staff as part of the Shirley Barish Memorial Israel experience. The group arrived home last Saturday. I joined them on their last week in the country, which we spent mostly exploring the Negev. On drives, we saw seemingly endless stretches of desert. We saw huge and strange rock formations at places like Timna Nature Park and the Ramon Crater. When Mark Twain visited this area in 1866, he wrote, "The further we went, the hotter the sun got, and the more rocky and bare, repulsive and dreary the landscape became." And while I do not agree with his adjectives, I could imagine that if this was the Israelites' first experience of the Promised Land thousands of years ago, they could easily get the impression that they'd been sold a bill of goods on this whole land of milk and honey thing. But I say thousands of years ago because the truth was that as our bus drove around the desert, everywhere we looked, we saw farms. The desolate landscape that the Israelites might have experienced and which Mark Twain described is increasingly being replaced with modern agriculture. At Kibbutz Lotan, one of Israel's first reformed kibbutzim, we learned about their unique approach to environmentally sustainable desert farming. And we visited the Ramat Negev Agro Research Institute. This cutting-edge center for agricultural R&D combines the wisdom gained by Jews and Arab farmers who have been working the land for generations with innovations of the 21st century technologies needed to develop new techniques and even new fruits and vegetables suited to desert farming. Here we saw floating strawberry troughs, which use water much more efficiently than strawberries grown in the ground. We saw innovative irrigation technologies that direct the desert's brackish water straight to the roots of the plant so that the salt content doesn't harm the plant's green leaves. And we tasted incredible varietals of cherry tomatoes that were developed right there in the Negev and that were grown with brackish water, which gave them a distinct and delicious flavor. Students come to Ramat Negev Center from all over the world to learn the skills of farming in this challenging environment. For example, in Egypt's Maryat region, the center helped establish an experimental facility to research crops that could thrive there. Through this work, Maryat is now one of the leading strawberry producers, not only in Egypt, but a prominent contributor around the world. In a time of global climate change, as our world continues to heat up and desertification becomes more common, these efforts will only become more vital. Ben-Gurion's vision to make the desert bloom will serve not just Israel and the Jewish people, but the entire planet. As we walked through the fields of Ramat Negev, of course, we saw pomegranate trees. It was well after their season, so all that was left on the trees were a few vestiges of last year's crop. A pomegranate, when left on the vine under hot and dry conditions, will not rot. It will just turn into a stone, a hardened remnant of seasons past. I picked up this one. And I was thinking about this desert pomegranate as I read this week's Torah portion and saw the Israelites complaining about the lack of produce in the desert. Midrash Tanchuma is one of the very few ancient commentaries that addresses this verse. Tanchuma says that the Israelites were complaining because up until that point, in addition to daily manna, there had been another miracle in the wilderness. There was a well that followed the Israelites on their journey, and every tribe had dug a channel from this well to their area of the encampment. Every day, the Israelites would plant seeds along the edge of the channel, which would miraculously grow and mature and bear fruit all in one day. But this well had finally dried up, and the miracle of instantaneous fruit trees had ceased. And this, according to the Midrash, was the reason the Israelites complained about a lack of fruit and a lack of water. But maybe God was trying to wean the Israelites off of this miracle to prepare them for their journey through the Promised Land. In real life, fruit trees don't sprout and bloom in a single day. It takes an immense amount of work to cultivate and patience to see it grow. And in the challenging environments of the desert, all the more so. God was saying, this promise of a promised land is not one where all the work will be done for you. On the contrary, it will require your innovation and ingenuity, your persistence and cooperation. A pomegranate tree is miraculous not because God makes it appear, but because it grows through the caring partnership between people and God. And what is true of a tree is also true of a nation. Whether America or Israel, a nation does not exist merely because God ordains it. It exists because we put in the work, because we nurture the seeds of democracy and protect them from pests and harsh elements. A nation exists because we give some of ourselves to it and share our vision for it. The promise is the work. I actually knew about this unique feature of pomegranate trees from my year living in Jerusalem for rabbinical school. Annie and I lived on the second floor of an apartment building, and out our window was a pomegranate tree. And over the course of the year, I watched the tree sprout buds and then flowers, which became tiny green fruits, which became big, red, beautiful pomegranates. And I realized that I could open the window and reach out and grab a pomegranate, which I did a few times until the woman who lived below us yelled at me as only an old Israeli woman can. It was the fastest, angriest Hebrew I ever heard. From what I understood, which was only a little bit, I guess technically it was her tree, and in my reaching I had shaken loose another pomegranate which had fallen and exploded all over her patio. It did not matter that the tree was so high that she could not reach the fruit at all. I was forbidden from picking the fruit of the tree, lest I receive another tongue lashing. So as the year wore on, I watched the pomegranates turn brown and solidify into these beautiful stones. On our last night in the Negev, I shared this story with the Berish teens. I told them that when I think of that tree, I think about the possibility of peace between Israelis and Palestinians. That pomegranate, a symbol of love, hardening because of the distance between my neighbor and me, two people so close and yet so far away. In difficult days, the possibility of peace feels like a tree whose produce we cannot harvest, fruitfulness just beyond our reach. But what I know is that we must find a way to harvest peace before our hearts harden like stone. The seeds of peace will not grow instantaneously or miraculously. They will grow through our effort, through our persistence, through our vision. Even in these difficult days when the water has been salted by so many tears, it may yet be the brackish water that waters the seed that will grow into a more verdant and vibrant future. May that future not be distant, and may all of us have the courage to lend our hearts and our hands to see that it will grow. Shabbat Shalom.